She matched with a cop on a dating app. Not a stranger in a dark alley. Not a masked man in a van. A police officer. Verified. Smiling, holding a rescue dog in one hand, a coffee in the other. He told her she was safe now. That he knew how to protect women. That he'd seen monsters and wasn't one of them. But what if the monster doesn't hide? What if he smiles, checks your license plate before the second date, and tells you exactly how not to make him angry? Tonight you'll hear the story of Naomi Keller. She didn't scream. She didn't fight. She survived in silence. And then she spoke. This isn't just about one man abusing his badge. It's about the machine behind him. The screens that blinked but didn't record. The emails that vanished. The people who looked away. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what we do here. Tell us where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. Because tonight's story might change how you see safety. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Let me take you back to the first night Naomi Keller met the man who would change everything, not with a threat, but with a whisper. He wore the badge like armor, but under it he carried a different kind of weapon, one you couldn't see until it was too late. He didn't stalk alleys. He sent goodnight texts. He didn't raise his voice. He opened car doors. He said things like, "I'm a cop. You're safe with me." And that was the trick. Because he didn't hide behind his uniform, he used it as an invitation. Lucas Grant served 17 years with the Metropolitan Police. He was praised for his discipline, his restraint, his record. Colleagues called him steady. Women called him trustworthy. Tinder called him verified. But behind closed doors, he was running a quiet operation. Not of arrests, but of submission, of making sure the woman in front of him never said no, because she never got to say yes. This isn't just the story of a predator in uniform. It's the story of a system built to protect him, where internal complaints went unread, where jokes were dismissed as locker room talk, where the word officer meant you couldn't possibly be the threat. And the worst part, no one asked how many women there were, because they didn't want to hear the answer. In this story, you'll meet someone who did speak. Not because she was the strongest, but because she was the first who realized what happened to her wasn't a misunderstanding. It was standard operating procedure. Let me take you back to the moment she knew. Not when he slammed a door, not when he pushed, but when he smiled across the table and said, "I've got a gun on me, by the way. But don't worry, I never use it on the ones who behave." Her name was Naomi Keller, 34. Communications officer for a mid-tier marketing firm. Divorced. One dog. She liked red wine art museums and first dates that didn't feel like interviews. The night she met Lucas Grant, it rained in small, harmless pulses, the kind that made London look cinematic instead of miserable. They met on Badoo. His profile said, protective, steady hands, good listener. She thought it was cute, maybe even try hard, but it felt safe. What she didn't know, the photo he used was taken the day after he'd testified in court for a colleague accused of misconduct. He wore the same smile in both places. They met in a pub near Victoria Station. Neutral ground, public, no pressure. He asked questions, not flirtatious, strategic. What do you do for work? Do you live alone? Are you close with your family? She didn't clock the pattern, not then. He told her he was a firearms officer, that he'd seen some things, that it was hard to meet women who understood the hours. He never talked about the job in detail. Just enough to paint power in shadow, a protector's glow darkened by sacrifice. Naomi bought it. Most people did. They didn't sleep together that night. He offered to walk her to her car. When she unlocked the door, he leaned in not for a kiss, but for a whisper. "I'm glad you're the quiet type. Makes things simpler later." She laughed, confused, then got in the car, drove home, and told herself, maybe that's just his humor. But a note of cold had already settled behind her ribs. She just didn't know its name yet. The texts came fast after that. "Morning beautiful. I dreamt of you last night. If I show up outside your flat, you'd let me in, right?" He was always just charming enough, just protective enough, just on the edge of too much. When she took too long to respond, he sent sorry, force of habit, occupational hazard. "I don't like being ignored." He added a smiley face, then a badge emoji. Naomi stared at the screen for 10 minutes. Didn't reply. The next time they met, he didn't ask. She opened the door. He kissed her before she could speak, took off his shoes, set his phone on her counter. Like he lived there. Like he'd done this 100 times. And he had. That night he told her he'd run her license plate. Just to be safe. Can't be too careful these days. She blinked. What's standard procedure, Naomi? You never know who people really are. Besides, it's not like you have anything to hide." He smiled. And that's when it hit her. It wasn't a date anymore. It was a search. She didn't sleep well. Woke up at 2:41 a.m. to find him in the kitchen, shirtless, checking the latch on her back door. He said, "Don't worry. Just making sure no one can get in." Then added, "Except me." When she told a friend about it the next day, the friend paused. "He's a cop, though. That's intense." But maybe he's just being careful, Naomi wanted to agree. But there was something about the way he'd said that last line, not protective, territorial. And deep down, a voice began to whisper, "This isn't what it feels like to be safe. This is what it feels like to be watched." Naomi didn't end things. Not after that night. Not even after waking up to find him still there, fully dressed, scrolling through her bookshelf, like he was reading her life backwards. She didn't say, "Get out." She didn't even say, "This feels wrong," because part of her still believed she was overreacting. And the other part was already being managed. The next few days were quiet on the surface. Lucas messaged less, but when he did, it was pointed. "Busy at work or just bored of me. Hope you're not out without telling me. London's unpredictable." He started sending photos, not of himself, but of places she'd mentioned casually. The coffee shop near her office, the bench where she walked her dog. Once a picture of her building, taken from street level, captioned "safe and sound." Like I promised, she showed the texts to a friend. A gay colleague named Leo, the only person Naomi trusted not to default to. Maybe he's just intense. Leo didn't hesitate. That's not care. That's surveillance. But when he asked if she wanted to report it, Naomi hesitated. To who? He was the police. The next time they met, she tried to create distance, suggested a public place. Lucas insisted on her flat. "It's not safe out there lately. You've seen the news." She gave in. He showed up with flowers, with wine, with a gun, strapped to his hip. Not hidden, just present. She stared at it. He noticed. Relax. It's part of the job. Besides, he leaned in, voice a shade lower. "You're the safest woman in London when I'm here." That night he was gentler, almost exaggerated in his patience. He kissed her neck, whispered sweet things, never asked for more, until she moved away too quickly. His hand closed around her wrist, soft but firm, like a warning disguised as affection. "You're tense," he said. "You always get like this when you think too much." She nodded, but inside something shifted. She wasn't afraid of the man in her flat. She was afraid of the force he belonged to, the system that wrapped around him like a second skin. 2 days later, she got a call from a private number. Just confirming you still live at her exact address, Miss Keller. She froze. Who's calling? Sorry, must have been a clerical mix-up. The line went dead. And just like that, she knew. He wasn't just in her apartment. He was inside the database. She started Googling. Quietly. Lucas Grant. Complaints. Whispers. She found nothing. Then tried again with variations. And buried 3 pages deep, she found a forum post from 2017, went on a date with a firearms officer named Lucas. Weird vibes. Anyone else get controlling behavior from this guy? No replies. No likes. Just silence, the kind that gets mistaken for nothingness. But Naomi knew better now. Silence wasn't absence. It was self-preservation. She began saving texts, screenshots, recorded one of their conversations on her phone. Not because she had a plan, but because she finally accepted the truth. If something happened to her, he'd be the first one assigned to investigate. The thing about systems is they're built to protect themselves first, and the people inside them learn to speak in whispers long before they ever raise alarms. Naomi didn't go to a police station. She went to a bar to meet Ari Morgan, a former officer turned community advocate, a friend of Leo's, someone who once believed in the badge until it cost him everything. They met at a quiet corner table. She didn't bring printouts, didn't even bring her phone. Just a question. How do I report a cop? When the cop is the one who taught me not to trust anyone, Ari didn't blink. You don't report him. You document him. Then you wait for the right person to believe you. He sipped his drink, then added, and you better pray he's not watching internal affairs too. Naomi told him everything. The texts, the plate check, the hand on her wrist, the way his voice changed when she didn't respond fast enough, the untraceable phone call, the picture of her flat. She didn't cry. She was too far past fear for that. Ari leaned back, exhaled slowly. We've had rumors. Nothing stuck. Man like that knows how to pick his targets. Smart women, independent, no ties, but just vulnerable enough to hesitate. He looked at her not as a victim, but as a witness. You said he's still messaging you. Naomi nodded. Then don't delete anything. Let him keep talking. That night, Lucas sent you were quiet today. Hope I didn't push too hard. But I like knowing you're mine. Then sleep tight. I might swing by tomorrow, just to check the locks. The next morning, Naomi filed a complaint. Not with the Met, with the Independent Office for Police Conduct. Anonymous, with screenshots, call logs, even the old forum post she'd found. She didn't expect much. She just wanted it on record, a breadcrumb in case she went missing. But something strange happened. 3 days later, she received a call. Blocked number, female voice. Miss Keller. We've been reviewing your submission. You're not the first. Naomi's pulse spiked. What do you mean? I mean, we've been waiting for someone to give us something we could use. And you did. They asked her to come in. Not to a precinct, to an unmarked building in Lambeth. She walked in wearing jeans and a plain coat. No phone. Hair tied back. Hands cold but steady. The woman leading the interview introduced herself only as Agent Clark. She didn't offer tea. Just a recorder, a form, and a question. Do you feel your life is in danger? Naomi didn't answer right away. She thought of Lucas's voice in the kitchen, the badge on his hip, the flowers on her table, the way her own name had sounded when he said it, like something already claimed. Then she nodded. Yes. But not because he'll hurt me. Because if he does, no one will call it what it is. Clark didn't argue. She just pressed record, and for the first time, Naomi stopped surviving in silence. She started telling the story out loud. Lucas knew, not how much Naomi had told. Not to whom, but he felt it, the shift. The change in tone, the longer pauses. The way she didn't reply good night anymore. The way she stopped calling him by name. He felt it the way wolves feel wind direction instinctively, intimately. And like all men who live behind masks too long, he didn't retreat. He tightened the strings. She came home to find her back window slightly open. No sign of forced entry. Nothing taken. But the curtains were drawn from the inside, and Naomi never left them like that. She called the building's front desk. No visitors logged. No cameras in her hallway. Just silence again, the kind that made her skin hum. She didn't call Clark. She knew better. She just packed a bag, left the lights on, and walked out the door without looking back. That night she stayed at Leo's. Lucas messaged at 2:11 a.m. Thought of you. Had a weird dream someone was trying to come between us. Funny, right? The IOPC had eyes on him now. Discreet. Rotational surveillance. Watching how often he logged into internal systems he wasn't assigned to. They found something. 3 license plate lookups tied to women with no open cases. No investigations. No calls for service. All within the last 60 days. One of them was Naomi's. One was a nurse. One was a teacher in Haringey whose number he'd saved as Chloe. Old uni. When they reached out to the teacher, she cried before they even finished the question. I told him no. He said that wasn't the word I was meant to use. The investigators didn't have enough to arrest. But they had enough to warn. Clark pulled Naomi into a meeting room. No overhead lights. Just the soft drone of a power strip humming. She said Lucas is still active. We can't spook him. But we need him to believe the walls are closing in. She paused. You willing to help with that? Naomi didn't blink. Yes. She'd lived in his quiet cage long enough. It was time to rattle it. They staged a leak. A story. Small. Unsourced. Published on a niche blog about online dating safety. Headline: Verified Officer or Verified Predator, what one woman learned after letting the badge in. No name, no photo, just details. Too specific for Lucas not to recognize himself. The next night, Naomi received a call. Not a text. A call. She answered without speaking. Lucas's voice came through. Calm. Even. You're making this worse than it has to be. I told you I don't hurt women who stay loyal. She didn't reply. Just let the line hang cold, electric. Behind her, Agent Clark watched the waveform in real time, recording everything. For the first time, Lucas Grant had crossed into the one territory. Even his badge couldn't shield him from threats. On tape. To a woman already in the system. Now it wasn't her word against his. It was his own voice. Hung like rope. Waiting. It started as a footnote. Buried in an article no one read the first time. A crime blog. A single paragraph. Multiple women have come forward alleging predatory behavior by a firearms officer attached to the Met. No charges filed. The officer remains unnamed. But those few lines did something no protocol had managed in years. They gave shape to a pattern. And patterns attract survivors. Naomi didn't expect it, but within days she received a message through a secure email forwarded by Clark's team. I read the story. I think it's him. I didn't have proof, but I remember how he made me feel. I thought I was crazy. She signed it simply S, then came another, then 3 more. All different names, same tone. He was charming, at first. He said I was safe with him. I froze and didn't understand why. Clark and her team began cataloging the accounts. There were too many to ignore. But still not enough, not in a legal sense. Because Lucas Grant didn't leave bruises. He left silence. And that in court still isn't evidence. So they changed tactics. A journalist, Amira Dawes, was brought in under tight conditions. No names, no promises, just access to the pattern. She listened to Naomi, watched her read the texts aloud, watched her eyes avoid certain words like they still burned. Then Amira asked, "Do you want him exposed or stopped?" Naomi said both. "But if I can only have one, I want other women to recognize him before he smiles." The article dropped 3 weeks later. Front page of The Standard. Title in bold all caps: "When protection becomes possession, the women who fell into a badge-shaped trap." No name. But to anyone who'd known him, or feared him, or still saw his texts pop up at 2:17 a.m. with just the word "mine," they knew exactly who it was. Lucas saw the article before sunrise. Security cameras outside his flat caught him storming out in uniform, phone pressed so tight to his ear it left a bruise on his cheek. He called Naomi. Blocked. Called her sister. Voicemail. He drove past her old building. Saw the blinds open, lights off. Too neat. Too staged. He knew then they're closing in. And she's not alone. The same day, Clark's office received a sealed envelope. No return address. Inside a USB drive. One folder, dozens of screenshots. Internal police chat logs. Images of women's plates addresses flagged as personal. Each file name began with LGRNT, his initials, his timestamp. It didn't come from Naomi or the task force. It came from inside the Met. Clark looked at the final file. A message typed in all caps. "I can't watch this anymore." He said they'd never talk. He was wrong. The informant had broken ranks. Not for justice, but because he finally believed Naomi would be the last unless someone else made him the first. That night, Naomi turned off all the lights, sat in Leo's living room, watched the city blink back at her. She whispered to herself, "You're not invisible anymore." And for the first time since Lucas touched her wrist in that too quiet flat, she believed it. They couldn't cover it up anymore. Not when the internal footage had the Met logo stamped in every corner of the screen. Not when 14 women from Croydon to Camden stood waiting in the hallway, statements in hand, their eyes no longer lost. And especially not when the evening news opened with a single question. How many complaints does it take before the system believes a woman, Lucas Grant, was placed on administrative leave? Not arrested, not publicly named, just under investigation. A phrase cold enough to sound formal and vague enough to let him keep his power. Naomi knew that. She knew he still had his phone. She knew he could access any database if he wanted. And sure enough, 2 days later, Clark got a call from internal oversight. He accessed someone's file while suspended. That someone was Naomi. He logged in at 3:14 a.m. from a device never registered. Only 6 minutes. But long enough for the system to understand he wasn't hiding. He was preparing for war. Clark met Naomi the next morning. "We need you to leave London, temporarily, until we lock him down completely." Naomi froze. Not from fear, but fury. "So he gets to make me disappear while he still walks around in armor?" Clark said nothing. Didn't argue, didn't comfort. Just placed a small box on the table. Inside a secure phone, a list of safe houses, and one quiet sentence. "This is survival, not surrender." At the same time, Lucas Grant was invited to a closed-door meeting. No handcuffs, no patrol car, just a procedural clarification request. He entered in a long coat tie, neat expression, calm, disturbingly so. Across from him sat a row of officials, Clark, the head of legal, and a representative from the Home Office. They opened a laptop, played back the recording of his call to Naomi. "I don't hurt the ones who stay loyal." He didn't deny it, just smirked and said, "Is that a threat or just bad pillow talk?" They asked about the messages. He said, "Flirtation." They asked about license plates of women unrelated to his cases. He replied, "Precaution." They asked why he accessed Naomi's profile while suspended. He shrugged. Old habits die hard. No remorse, no denial, just pure contempt. And it was that contempt, not the evidence, that finally pushed them to sign the warrant. Lucas Grant wasn't arrested because they knew he was guilty. He was arrested because for the first time, they could no longer pretend they didn't. Naomi left London that night. Leo saw her off. Didn't say much. Just watched as if watching a part of the city one he used to believe in disappear. Through the fogged window of the car, Naomi looked back at the city lights. She didn't know where she'd be next week. Didn't know what Lucas would try next. But she knew this: if he is fire, then I am the smoke that makes him visible. Naomi didn't appear at the first hearing. Not out of fear, but because she knew the first time is never about truth. It's about ritual, about cameras, about the defense nodding politely as if everything still fit within the bounds of a misunderstanding. Lucas Grant entered the courtroom with hollow eyes. No guilt, no remorse. Just the look of someone inconvenienced. His lawyer spoke like the lines had been rehearsed. Mr. Grant had consensual relations with several women. No physical evidence suggests force. No formal complaints were filed until media involvement. The word media was emphasized as if the article, not Lucas's actions, was the reason he sat there. Naomi watched from a secure screen. She took notes not to remember but to control her anger. Force. No physical evidence. Willing participation. Phrases repeated like a formula, not to understand her, but to erase her from the frame. That night, Clark met her at the safe house. He brought transcripts of statements from 3 other women ones who had filed formal reports after Naomi stepped forward. One was a firefighter, one a preschool teacher, one a district office clerk. They had one thing in common. They met him through an app. They'd been followed. They'd all been called obedient. One woman wrote in her statement he'd joke about handcuffs, but I don't think he was joking. I just laughed. Because I didn't want to find out. The case began to shift. It was no longer one woman's accusation, but a documented pattern of behavior, systemic with a single point of origin: Lucas Grant. The press called him the officer in the shadows. Not because he hid, but because the system had taught everyone not to look there. The day Naomi gave her public testimony, the rain fell hard. She didn't wear black, didn't cover her face, didn't tremble. She stepped up with a folder not to read from, but to place firmly on the table. Solid, audible, visible. Then she looked straight at the legal bench. Her voice wasn't loud or rushed, just steady and cold, like an interrogation hallway. I was never told to be quiet. I was trained to be. By apps that reward silence. By men who know how far they can go before the law calls it a crime. Lucas never said, "I own you." He never needed to. Every glance, every login, every late-night knock said it for him. No applause in the courtroom. No gasps. Just the sound of a pen falling from a reporter's hand, and members of the jury looking at each other as if realizing for the first time that a predator doesn't have to shout. He just needs to know the system will whisper for him. Clark left the hearing late. He turned to Naomi. "You know you cracked this open, right?" Naomi nodded. "No, I just refused to stay closed." Lucas Grant used to walk into the precinct like a man who couldn't be replaced. Always on time, always sharp, always in control of the room by saying nothing. Now he walked into the interrogation room with the look of a man who knew no one stood behind him anymore. No longer Officer Grant, no longer Lucas from the task force, just a suspect in a wrinkled white shirt stripped of every access point he once manipulated. In front of him was a detailed board, every mouse click, every unauthorized login, every internal message laced with half jokes, half threats. She's a screamer, that one. She'll learn how to behave, trust me. And at the very bottom, a single line that closed the file for good, transferred to restricted custody, pending trial for multiple counts of coercion, unlawful surveillance, and power abuse. In that room, no one called him sir anymore. No one avoided his gaze like before. A young officer stood silently behind him, one hand gloved, the other resting on a pair of cuffs. Lucas hadn't been sentenced yet, but his power had already been peeled away slice by slice like fabric stripped from flesh. The press zeroed in on one question. How did a man like this survive 17 years in the force? The answer didn't come from a police chief's statement, not from the internal review report. It came from a leaked audio clip, the voice of a senior commander, speaking during a closed-door meeting. You think we didn't know, we just didn't want to be the first ones to pull the thread. And that's when the thread began to unravel. One of Lucas's former colleagues, Officer Imran Webb, resigned shortly after. In a handwritten letter to Clark, he wrote, "I saw too much, laughed at too many jokes, thought silence made me neutral. It didn't. It made me complicit." Naomi read that line while sitting in a small cafe outside London. She didn't feel triumphant, just light. As if the weight that had once pressed against her chest was finally being shifted to where it belonged. Not on the shoulders of victims, but on those who chose to stand aside. That evening, as the wind slipped through her window, Naomi opened her email. A new message. No name. No sender address. Just one line: I was going to say something in 2015. I didn't. But I will now. No signature needed. She knew it was one of the dozens who had once stood beside Lucas in courtrooms, shared beers with him after shifts, laughed when he called a woman someone learning to behave. He used to think he controlled everything: timing, schedules, emotions. But what he never controlled was how women remember. Not in pictures, but in small details: the shift in tone, the text that came too late, the hand on a wrist that wasn't asked for. And once they begin to tell, they don't need to scream. They just need to speak together. The next day, Naomi stepped onto the street in her old coat. The wind caught her hair. No one paid her any attention. No one recognized her from the headlines. And that was when she felt safest. Being unseen by him is finally not the same as being invisible. They didn't arrive at the same time. They didn't wear matching clothes. They didn't carry signs. They just showed up one by one, quiet, clear, and no longer hiding. 19 women, each one a story, each one a different way. Lucas Grant made them feel like they were the ones at fault. One was a university student, one a single mother, one a rookie officer who quit after just 3 months of working with him. They didn't know each other. But the stories were eerily alike. He asked if I trusted him before anything even happened. He never hit me. Just said things that made me believe I couldn't say no. When I cried, he said it was just a misunderstanding, that I was being dramatic. The public began to understand this wasn't just the case of one abusive man. It was a question about the structure that allowed him to last this long. Why did no one investigate? Why did every report vanish from the system? A journalist from The Guardian uncovered 4 internal reports with Lucas's name marked as not severe enough. One of them came with a note: avoid impact on patrol unit morale. At the same time, social media lit up with a leaked audio clip: Naomi not under lights, not on camera. Just her voice recorded. Soft, but clear. You don't need a weapon when you carry authority. You don't need to scream when silence keeps you safe. Overnight, the clip was shared more than 1 million times. The hashtag #Shuhash Officer in the Shadows trended globally, and with it, hundreds of women began telling their own stories, not just about Lucas, but about other men like him, protected by systems like his. In a closed-door meeting, the acting police chief stared at a list of personnel with personal ties to Lucas Grant. Half of them were under review. A third had already resigned. She turned to her aide and asked, "If this is just one man, why does it feel like we're unraveling a doctrine?" No one answered. Naomi by then was sitting by the window of her new apartment. No more hiding, no more anonymity. She read each account from the women, feeling the ache quiet and sharp like wind through an open chest. One woman wrote, "I thought I was crazy. Then I read your story, and I realized he didn't break me. He trained me to stay quiet." Naomi replied with 3 words: "Not anymore. Ever." The next day, Parliament held a public hearing on the mishandling of internal misconduct in law enforcement. And for the first time, the term institutional coercion was entered into the legal record. Not just to speak about Lucas Grant, but to name something that had always existed and had never been acknowledged. One of the most terrifying things about power is that it doesn't collapse with a bang. It bleeds from the inside. The Independent Office for Police Conduct (IOPC) had originally planned to review only the actions of Lucas Grant. But after the 3rd hearing, they were forced to widen the scope. Because what they saw wasn't just a single officer abusing his role, it was a file dozens of pages long, outlining the quiet complicity of an entire structure. Emails ignored, complaints rerouted, whistleblowers reassigned. And Lucas, he got promoted. Twice. The press began using the term internal grace, a kind of unwritten privilege understood by all but found in no law. Don't break the wall. Because on the other side isn't the enemy, it's someone just like us. Naomi was invited to speak at the Justice for Survivors Forum. This time it wasn't a courtroom. It was a stage. No witness stand. Just light and listening. She stood there without reading from a page. She spoke about the night he called at 2:11 a.m., about the sentence that landed like a whisper but chained like iron: "I don't hurt the ones who stay loyal." She didn't cry. She just spoke slowly. What's terrifying isn't what he did. It's how many people around him chose to see it and look away. From the audience, a young woman raised her hand. "Do you think the system can ever be safe?" Naomi looked at her for a moment, then said, "Not until it admits it never was." At that same moment, inside London Police Headquarters, another closed-door meeting was underway. A deputy commissioner read out the names of 36 officers being reinvestigated for covering up or ignoring allegations against Lucas. A folded note passed under the table read, "We either burn it down and rebuild, or we bleed out pretending it's not burning." No one objected. Lucas Grant was transferred to a segregation unit where former badge holders are kept apart. He no longer had private counsel. No more letters of support from former colleagues. Just silence, the same silence he once used as a weapon. But this time, silence didn't protect him. It consumed him. Naomi didn't follow every hearing after that. She no longer needed to track his every move. Because now she understood every time a woman stands up, another stone is pulled from the foundation he once stood on. And that foundation is cracking. Not because anyone screamed, but because finally, no one stayed silent. Not everyone wanted Naomi to be believed. Because when one woman tells the truth, 10 others are forced to confront the fact that they didn't listen in the first place. It began with anonymous comments, "She's using this to get famous. If he was that bad, why'd she see him a second time?" It was consensual back then, regret doesn't make it coercion. Then came the neutral articles. "We need to listen, but we must also be cautious with unverified accounts." And then the podcasts. Channels that claimed to offer social analysis began raising questions. Could Naomi Keller just be the face of a rising anti-male agenda, using the system to flip power dynamics? Naomi read all of it in silence. No replies. No reaction. Because she understood power doesn't need to win the argument to survive. It just needs to plant enough doubt to make people turn away. Clark called her, "We've found someone leaked part of your personal file to a dark forum. Not a hacker. Not an enemy with a face. Just someone from within. Someone with access. Someone like Lucas, but not yet caught." And that was the real issue. Lucas wasn't an anomaly. He was the product of a structure that others were still working to sustain. Naomi didn't back down, but she was tired. Tired of how every step toward truth came with a shadow, where people didn't just question Lucas's actions, they questioned her emotions. "Are you sure you're not exaggerating the pain? Are you sure you're not just craving attention?" One night she received a message from a woman named Dahlia. Brief. No embellishment. "I stood outside the police station 3 times. 3 times I walked away. Your story is the reason I went back. And on the 4th time I stepped inside." Naomi read it, and for the first time in weeks, she breathed without feeling her chest tighten. The next morning, she sent a single email, not to the press, not to any organization, just to Clark. Subject line, "This isn't backlash. This is the scream before the glass breaks." Clark replied with 3 words, "We're still here." And they were even as public opinion began to fracture, even as the media grew weary of a case that dragged on too long, the survivors kept coming forward, not loudly, not needing to be believed right away. They just needed one thing, to not walk alone anymore. The official trial date was set. Lucas Grant would face 39 charges from 16 witnesses. The accusations ranged from abuse of authority and psychological coercion to unauthorized use of internal systems for personal gain. But what truly brought him to court wasn't a punch, but a series of things no one could name when they happened. Trained silence, uninvited touches, a 3 a.m. text that simply said, "I saw you from my car." The courtroom was full. No press allowed inside. Only survivors and those who had once doubted whether their pain was enough to be believed. Naomi didn't sit in the front row. She chose a corner in the back, where she could see the entire room and see the other women who didn't need anyone to lead them, but still chose to walk in just as she once had. The prosecutor didn't begin with outrage. She began with numbers. 17 years as an officer. Over 120 women messaged with the defendant via apps. Of those, 26 confirmed experiences of emotional control, behavioral manipulation, or feeling unable to say no without fearing consequences. Then came the evidence. Not bruises, not CCTV footage, but voice recordings, message screenshots, and unauthorized access logs, and words that couldn't be mistaken. "You like being watched, don't you? I'm the only one who knows how to keep you safe. It's not force if you don't fight." Lucas's attorney responded with the usual defense strategy. They had exchanged romantic messages. No one called the police immediately. Some even saw him again afterward. But 2025 wasn't 2005. The court no longer bowed to the word ambiguous, no longer smirked at the word manipulation. Instead, they listened. and heard each woman say the same thing in different words. I didn't say yes. I said nothing. Because no felt dangerous. Naomi took the stand on day 4. No tears, only eyes, sharp as shattered glass, but still clear. She began from the start, when he placed his hand on her wrist without asking, when she heard the door lock turn slowly, as if each click folded another layer of awareness into silence. He never raised his hand, but I kept my voice low for weeks after. That's what power does. It doesn't hurt you loudly. It changes how you speak in your own home. After her testimony, no one in the courtroom moved. No murmurs, no clicking pens. Just a different kind of silence, one that no longer belonged to him. Because for the first time, silence became the weapon of truth. Naomi stepped down from the witness stand. She didn't look back. She didn't need to see his face anymore. Because she knew the most dangerous man in the room is no longer the one people fear. It's the one they finally see. The trial lasted 4 weeks. There was no tearful climax. No surprise witness walking in at the last minute. Just days layered on top of each other. Documents the hum of audio recordings and the undeniable presence of truth now typed and archived. The jury took less than 8 hours to reach a verdict. Not because everything was obvious, but because there was nothing left to avoid. It was all in the records texts Lucas sent at midnight. License plates of victims accessed without cause. Maps detailing the times he used his badge to enter residential areas outside his jurisdiction. But what made turning away impossible were the details that seemed too small to matter. He said, "I trust you," in a tone that felt like a threat. He brought wine and handcuffs. Not as a joke. He called me his quiet one, like I was a category he tracked. Lucas sat still as the sentence was read. His face didn't change. No flinch, no confusion. Just a familiar emptiness, the shape of a man who had lived too long in a space no one dared question, so long he could no longer understand why he wasn't believed anymore. The court declared, guilty. Sentence life imprisonment, no parole. Not because of what he did once, but because he turned small things into tools, and the system let him use them for 17 years. Naomi didn't clap. She didn't cry. She simply folded her hands together and looked toward the far end of the courtroom, where another woman sat unnamed, but with eyes that said I was there too. And now I can leave. After the verdict, an emergency meeting was called at the Home Office. It was no longer about an individual. It was about a process. A leaked internal memo later read, "The issue isn't that we didn't see Lucas. It's that we built a structure where someone like him would always blend in." Clark met Naomi one last time. No longer as a protector. Just as a witness. "He's done." Naomi nodded. He was done the moment I stopped doubting myself. That night, Naomi sat by the window. No lights on, no laptop open, just letting the darkness pass through. And for the first time, that darkness no longer carried his shape. Life didn't return to normal after the verdict. It couldn't. Naomi didn't go back to her old job. She didn't speak to the media despite dozens of invitations arriving every day. She declined every talk show, every exclusive interview. Because not everyone who speaks the truth wants to become a symbol. Instead, she spent her mornings in a small rented flat in South London, folding documents, sorting emails, helping a group of volunteer lawyers build a support system for women abused by those in uniform. They didn't call it a victim support center. They called it the quiet room, a place where the first thing you walk into isn't the demand to explain everything. It's the right to be believed. The Home Office announced new reforms, restricted access to personal data for officers not directly assigned to a case, a complaint system that bypasses direct supervisors, All reports of personal misconduct to be reviewed by an independent body. And during the press conference, an official said what no one had ever said publicly before. We failed to protect women not because we didn't know how, but because we didn't want to look at the men we trusted. Naomi heard it on the radio. She didn't turn the volume up, just loud enough as if those words didn't need to echo in the room only inside her. Lucas Grant by then was in a high-security prison. No cellmate, no visitors. A former corrections officer told a reporter, "He walks like he still owns the corridor." But no one listens when he speaks. A young female officer who once worked a shift with him in 2022 emailed Naomi. It wasn't long, just one line, "I'm sorry. I saw things. I stayed quiet. But because of you, I won't do that again. Ever." Naomi replied, "You don't owe me anything, but you owe it to the next woman." At the end of the month, she attended a closed-door workshop in Bristol. No press, no name tags, just a circle of women sharing things they'd never put into words. One of them said he wasn't violent, but I stopped laughing for 6 months after I met him. The room went silent. Naomi responded, "That's the part no one measures, the time we lose. Just learning how to be in our own body again." She didn't use the word healing. She didn't use the word closure. She just said, "Some of us don't get to go back." So we build forward. In the final month of the year, a report was released. Over 400 pages. Title, "Power, Silence, and the Disguise of Trust." It was sent to every national police force. Read in silence. And for the most part, folded shut after page 3. Because the beginning alone was enough to make readers uncomfortable. The case of Lucas Grant is not an anomaly. It is a mirror. One that reflects not what we fear, but what we've chosen to ignore. Naomi no longer lived in the shadows, but she didn't live under the spotlight either. She lived in between, where no one hailed her as a hero and no one called her a liar anymore. She became a name that when spoken was followed by about 3 seconds of silence, not out of awkwardness, but because no one could deny she had been right. Lucas Grant would not be pardoned. His sentence would not be reduced. He was mentioned one last time in the papers when his name was officially removed from the list of officers with distinguished service. No letter came from prison. No public, if only. Only a quiet erasure, just like how he once existed in the gray space between power and trust. Naomi kept working. She didn't retell her story. She simply taught other women how to recognize the signs, how to say no before fear took over, how to trust their instincts before the system chose to ignore them. One evening, in the final stretch of winter, she wrote on a piece of paper, "Justice isn't about what's proven. It's about what can't be unseen once you finally look." Then she folded it. Didn't send it. Didn't publish it. Just tucked it into her wallet next to a new ID card. Not from the government. Not from any organization. Just a slip of paper that read, "I believe you." Naomi's story didn't end in victory. There was no happily ever after. Only truth still there, cold, clear, and waiting to be told again. Because somewhere another woman is picking up her phone, scrolling past a profile photo with the caption, "Trust me. I'll protect you." And if she reads it, and her heart skips a beat, if her eyes pause a moment too long at the word cop, then Naomi has done what justice never promises. She's made silence afraid. She didn't ask to be a symbol. She didn't want to be remembered for what happened to her. But Naomi Keller became a name not because of what Lucas Grant did, but because of what she refused to let him keep. Her silence. Her story. Her right to be heard without needing a bruise to prove it. Because when someone with a badge chooses to control you, it's not just your body that's taken. It's your voice, your patterns, your peace. And when systems built to protect the wrong people, they don't just fail, they become complicit. If this story made you think, made you uneasy, made you want to ask one more question, before swiping right again, drop us a comment below. Would you have seen the signs? Would you have believed her? And if you want more stories like this, raw, cinematic, true, don't forget to subscribe. Because sometimes the most dangerous man in the room isn't the one with a weapon, but the one no one ever questions.